Hello, so in this video I'm going to be talking about logic and pattern recognition and using those things to help you solve traditional tactical puzzles. So what I'm going to be using is the Polgar Mates book that's above, which has got 5,334 million positions in actually, but the Mates in 1, 2 and 3, and in this video I'm going to look at Mates in 2. Okay, so what's the difference between pattern recognition and logic? Well, quite simply, logic is using a sort of cold process of working out the solution by logical means, whereas pattern recognition is just sort of instantly seeing the solution because you've seen the ideas before. Now, the problem with pattern recognition is it obviously takes experience and time in order to gain pattern recognition, right? But how do you get that in the first place? Okay, so what you really want, that's what you want to be doing. We'll be looking at a chess position and doing, yeah, bang, I know what the out solution is. I've seen the pattern before, and you're really, really strong. You become a really, really strong player. But how do you get to that process? Well, you might use tactical logic in particular situations in order to help you improve your pattern recognition, if that makes sense. If it doesn't, don't worry, I'm going to show you an example. So let's look at the first example, which is a mate in 2. So this is a mate in 2 position, and it's white to play. And, as I normally do with these sorts of things, I picked up the first position at random, which it doesn't really matter. So looking at this position then, it's white to play, it's mate in 2. Now, if you're a strong player, you might already see the solution, right? Because you've seen the pattern before, and you go, yeah, I know it's that. Bang, 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 and you get the solution correct. But if you're a beginner player, it can be more difficult, or even an intermediate player, to find the solution. So the logical process, how I would go about looking at this is looking at the checks, right? So looking at all the checks into position. But first of all, I'll just assess the position a little bit, right? So it's white to play. We know it's mate in 2, right? So any sort of like king move, for example, if you move the king to e5, then that's not going to work because there's going to be a queen check. Right, and then the king's going to have to move, and it's not going to be mate in 2. So you can discount any sort of quiet moves because of the nature of the king and the queen in like an open position, an open board. So it's not going to be a quiet move. It's more likely going to be a check in this position, or a very, very strong threat. But again, with the threat, let's say we bring the queen somewhere like d4, then we still have a check. Right, and then it's not going to be mate in 2. So it's going to be a check in this position. So a logical process then of working this out is just to count all the checks and go through each of them in order. And you should soon find this sort of solution. So let's look at the checks that we've got then. So we've got 1, and I've just coldly calculate every single check. 1 check, bishop. We've got knight check. 2. We've got check. 3. And then we've got 1, 2, 3 checks with the queen, right? So that's 6 checks in total. So what I would do then is just go through that in a logical process. So let's start with the bishop. So let's move the bishop. I'm not going to move the pieces, actually. I'm just going to do that. So check. So we've got bishop check. And then we have to look at 2 different moves then. We can look at king taking and king taking here, right? And then have we got a follow-up? So let's look at the first one. Bishop check, king takes, queen check, then you look at the next series of checks, but after that, the king just strips away, right? So then we can completely discount this first check, right? Because we just found out that doesn't work. So the next move I would look at is knight coming to h5 check, right? And then what have we got? Well, the back rank's solidified, but after this move, king could move. Let's just take that away. So check, king could move to h7. And then we're running out of checks. We can't check here because the king would just take it. So this doesn't look like this works either. So let's discount the knight check. So then the next logical process, let's look at this one. That check fails. The king can sidestep to h7 again. And then the queen sort of can't do any checks because that sort of fails as well. So that fails as well. So with the bishop discounted and the knight discounted, what we can do is look at the queen checks. So let's look at the first queen coming to f8 check first, because it's the first square, right? I don't know. In a logical point of view, you just do it logically, really, in that sort of sense. So queen coming to f8 check. So we have to look at the response, king takes queen or king takes knight. So let's start with king taking the queen, as that's the most logical move, I suppose. So after king takes, we have the check, one more check in the position, bishop coming into h6, which will be checkmate. Let's put that on the board, actually. takes, and then checkmate. So that is looking promising. That's a mate in 2. But what about with knight takes? Sorry, what about king takes knight? So queen check, then we have to look at this move, and then we have to look at the follow-up checks. Now, this is not possible because the queen guards this square. There's got a check here, but we've got the right move. Queen come in here, checkmate. Okay, so this one works, and this is the position. There we go, and the bishop covers this escape square on g5. All right, so that's sort of logical approach. Okay, so next position. So if you want to look at this one, give it a quick assessment. And if you want to pause the video, you can do. I'm going to keep talking. So, yeah, so quick assessment, the same thing. It's a mate in 2. It's white point of view. And obviously, if this black knight moves, it's going to be check. So any other quiet move, we know in this position is not going to work because let's just say you make a quiet move, play something like this. And then the knight's going to drop, check. And yeah, it's not going to be mate in 2. We're actually going to lose the queen. So, again, we're looking for checks in the initial position. So the logical process is to count all the checks, right? The pattern recognition process, you probably already found the solution. But if you're logically going about it, you're looking to count all the checks and just work down through in a sort of logical manner. So we've got knight check, it's 1. We've got queen check, 2. And we've got queen check, 3. Okay, so 3 checks in this position, and then you just logically work down them in it from a logical point of view. So knight coming in to f7 check, king moves, and then we don't have anything. We have another check, but it's not checkmate, so it's not the knight move. And obviously a queen coming to d8 checks, just loses a queen for no reason. There's another check afterwards, but the king can escape. So the last one, and the correct solution is queen taking on h6 with check, and then you have to have an answer to both the king coming to g8 and the pawn taking. So let's just look at the first idea first of the pawn taking. If pawn takes, then we have the knight come in and check, and thankfully because of this bishop covering this square and the rook covering this file, this is checkmate in this position. And if let's put it on the board actually, king moves to g8, then we just take on here, and that's checkmate. So that's a logical way of doing it. And that was a much easier position. I felt there was less checks to go by, so the logic's looks a lot simpler. But the pattern, these are just clear patterns that you can study in this position. But in this position certainly, then the coordinates sort us out. Okay, so I'll do one more. Okay, so if you want to look at this position, if you want to pause the video, you can do. I'm just going to talk through it now. So looking at this position then, we see that the black king's exposed, white's got overwhelming attacks. It's not a surprise that there's a mate here just glancing at the position after a second. We can also note that the queen is hanging in this position. And what ideally we want to do is checkmate on this square, but it's covered by this knight. So that's the first thing that sort of jumps out at me. So, you need to move the queen. So if we're doing it from a pattern point of view, then you probably already solved the position. But if you're a beginner player and you've not got to that level of experience, then the logical approach is a good sort of way to get towards that approach. So let's have a look. Let's count the checks then. So we have 1, 2, 3 by a queen. Then we have 1, 2, 3 with the knights. With 6 checks in this position, you just go through logically. So let's start by just checking with the knights. So knight checks, either one of these knights, but we have to do it individually because the position left on the board affects obviously where the pieces move. So let's start with, this knight checking first. Or in this position, we have to look at the king coming to this square or the rook taking, which it doesn't really look promising, to be honest, because there's too much. But let's just look at this knight check. King comes in to g7, and the queen can't access this square still, and it's just not going to really work. There's another check here that you have to take into account, right? But let me put that on the board because it's getting a bit messy. So there's this position, but then we can just take here. So this is not looking like it's going to work from that point of view. Let's look at this knight coming in. A similar thing, really. The king can move, or the rook can take. Let's just look at rook takes. But the queen still can't get access to this square. Can check here. But then we've got things like this. And yes, it's not promising with the knight checks, taking on h7. Right, knight come in to d7 check. Well, then we've got the king can sidestep. And then it's not obvious, because the queen protects this knight as well on this square. Let's just put that on the board. This is getting messier. Yeah, so this is not looking promising already. We're looking at things like this that are ridiculous, but you still, from a logical point of view, you're just coldly looking at all the checks in the positions, right? And it's not the most effective way to solve it. Pattern recognition is by far the most superior, but this is definitely something we can look at. Other checks in the position. Check here, unfortunately, fails. So this is not looking very good either. So we're looking that there's going to be a queen check in the position. And I'm already getting fed up with this position, so I'm just going to put the solution on. So taking here is no good because the queen covers. So the correct solution is queen check on here. And then after the knight takes, because obviously the queen's protected by the knight. Then we have the knight swooping in, delivering checkmate on this square. And, for me, this instantly, the pattern recognition just jumps out immediately because you've got the knight covering these squares and then this knight covering these squares. And unfortunately for black, the escape route is covered by black's own knight on e7. So, okay, so I want to talk about a few more things and then that's me done. Right, so the blackboard's out again, it's lecture time. So you can see how clumsy the logic approach is, right? It sometimes works, but it soon gets really, really messy. And, this is why I'm against this sort of checklist approach. You see some, recommendations to have a checklist. Look at the checks, look at the captures and the threats. It's a good idea in theory, but in practice, when you've got complex positions with lots of checks in, it soon gets messy really, really quickly and completely unpractical in a real game. You see these sort of checklist approaches where some people recommend starting with the queen, starting with the rook, then going to the bishop, look for the bishop checks, and look for the knight checks, then look for the pawn checks. And it's just totally impractical and just does not work. But you can still apply bits of logic to help you. But, in the long run, you really want to be getting good at pattern recognition, which is just instantly seeing the position, instantly sort of like, after a quick survey and a check and everything, patterns will start jumping out and you start getting much stronger much more quickly. So that's why I recommend studying pattern recognition training over just generally having a checklist approach. Really don't recommend the checklist approach, but you can use it in some positions. So that's the reason I wrote common chess patterns, and I studied that, which is available on Chessable. If you want, I'll put a link in the description. Okay, so some of the questions then. So people often say, well, when you're studying tactics positions, there's a tactic. Well, it doesn't matter, in my point of view, because the object of studying tactics, right, or studying pattern recognition is not to pretend you're in a real game, but just to get better at studying tactics, right, and getting stronger at tactics. So the fact that, hey, it's a mate in 2, it's a mate in 3 or whatever it is, or there's a winning position there, it doesn't matter for the purposes of tactic training. So what? You're getting better, getting stronger at tactics. When a tennis player is drilling the serve, right, he doesn't think there's an opponent hitting it back. It's just a practice of that particular skill. Next question. Difficulty of positions. I've recommended elsewhere that you study simpler positions, you get stronger at tactics, stronger at spotting patterns if the positions are much more simple. So mates in 2s and 3s are good for this sort of thing, this sort of training. But essentially, you want to be doing positions that are easier, right? Don't really go for the harder sort of stuff. And 90% of the time, I recommend simple patterns and drill those over and over and get really, really strong, really, really fast at the simple basics. And then use this other 10% of tactics time to sort of push in your calculation with harder positions. Any other questions? Let me think. Well, yeah, another question that comes up quite a lot is how much time should you allocate towards tactics training? Well, it's a complex question because it depends on what sort of level you are and what sort of time you've got and things like that. But I would say that for the under 2,000 level player, it's definitely the beginner and the intermediates should be spending the majority of the time studying patterns and tactics and getting stronger tactically. And then everything else, following through for things like the positional stuff and a bit of opening, a bit of endgame and stuff. But majority, 80% of your time, studying tactics and getting stronger tactically, because that is why you win and lose games, basically, beyond, well, certainly 2,000 level anyway. It's tactics predominantly. The lower you are, the more important it is. Keeping pieces safe, not blundering and getting strong tactically. Okay, so that's enough of this video. Right, thanks for watching.